Hi, welcome everyone. My name is Lauren Webb. I'm the Oral History Coordinator with the Washington County Historical Society. Today we are interviewing Kelly Mountford, who is long associated with the Washington County News and Classic Printing in the Downtown Historic District in St. George, Utah. Today's date is Tuesday, May 27th, 2025, and we are in the Community Education Channel studios on the campus of Utah Tech University. So let's begin the interview. What is your full name?
It's James Kelly Mountford.
Okay. Where and when were you born?
I was born in Heber City in Wasatch County in Utah.
Okay. What are your parents' names?
My parents' names are James and Doris Mountford.
Okay. Did other family members live nearby?
Basically, in Heber, I had relatives. My mom's family had relatives all over. And my dad's relatives were more down into the Payson and Spanish Fork area.
Okay. What did your parents do for a living?
They basically ran the newspapers, is what my dad did, and my mom was a homemaker.
Okay. What did your community look like outside of your family? Your neighborhood, what did that look like?
Basically, in Heber, we were out in the farm country.
Okay.
Our house was on the property of an old flour mill that was in Heber, and my grandfather bought that and gave a piece of it to my dad to build our family home on. So basically, we were out just in the fields there east of Heber City.
How many bedrooms?
It was a 3-bedroom home.
On a fairly large lot?
It was on an acre lot, and plus it also had a 2-acre field around the back side of it also.
Okay. Where did your ancestors come from?
Okay, my Mountford ancestors came from England and the Isle of Man.
Okay. And what about on your other side?
My McGuire ancestors came from Ireland, and actually, my great-grandfather on the McGuire side was down here in southern Utah. He was instrumental in the cotton mill and over there in Washington City.
In Washington City,
yes.
Okay. When did they come to the United States, approximately?
Let's see, let me check my notes here. Okay, the McGuires came during the potato famine in Ireland.
In Ireland, okay.
Yeah, they immigrated to Canada first, and then they joined the LDS Church, and then came to Utah.
Where did they first settle?
It was in Canada.
In Canada?
Yeah.
Where in Canada?
I'm not quite sure. It was probably reasonably close to the coast, because they weren't in Canada very long, because mainly they came over to the North America to get away from the potato famine, and then they got interested in the LDS Church, and then that's when they decided to.
And then they moved to Heber City.
They moved into Utah.
Into Utah,
Yeah.
somewhere in Utah.
Yeah.
Okay. Describe your grammar school and your high school years.
Okay, grammar school. I started out grammar school in Heber City. I went to the Central School up there, which was one of the 2 elementaries that was there in Heber Valley. And then when we moved to St. George, I went to East Elementary.
Which is now Atwood Innovation Plaza.
Yes.
Yeah.
I tell my family, I said that the only school that's not been torn down that I went to here is East Elementary now.
That's where I went.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And high school?
Okay. After East, I went to Woodward Junior High.
You went to Woodward Junior High.
Because it was
Same
still
as
Woodward
me.
before it changed to
Right.
Dixie Junior High.
Yeah.
And then I went to Dixie High School also.
And graduated from there?
And graduated from
What
Dixie
year?
High in 1980.
1980. Okay. What were your hobbies and interests as a child?
As a child, it was mainly, since my dad was really big into going to Strawberry to go fishing, we did an awful lot of fishing. And there was a lot of streams around Heber Valley that we used to go fish in. So that was one thing. And then my dad also enjoyed rock hounding and that. So we was always out running around, because there was the Red Ledges that was just about 3 or 4 blocks up the street from our house, that we could just go wander through those rocks and look for all kinds of stuff up there.
Yeah, it sounds fun.
Yeah.
Did you belong to any influential clubs or organizations while you were in Dixie High or in the community?
Basically at Dixie High, I was just in the usual things that high school kids do, like the science club and
Did they have the Industrial Arts Club?
yeah, they had the Industrial Arts Club.
Did you belong to that?
Yes, I was
Harley
in
Iverson
with Harley Iverson.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
Education-wise, did you attend college or university?
I attended Dixie College first,
Okay.
as most people from this area did, just because it was
yeah.
handy because it
Yeah.
was here. And I
Did you graduate?
I
With
graduated from Dixie College with an associate's degree in applied science for
What year?
automotive technology.
What year?
1983.
Oh, wow. Okay. And then after that?
After
any
I
other?
attended 2 years up to the University of Utah because I was looking into mechanical engineering.
Okay. And maybe that we'll come back to that. Tell us about your grandfather, Frank Mountford, and his purchase of the Washington County News.
Okay. Well, Grandpa Frank, he was another printer's ink in his blood man because his father was a printer. And he, James Henry, he learned how to print at AeroPress Square in Salt Lake as a young man. He learned the craft there at AeroPress and Gardner Press. But then Grandpa Frank, his father moved the family to Fillmore, and they bought the Millard County Progress.
Okay.
And then my grandfather Frank and his brother Harold both was in the business with their dad, and they operated that newspaper for 8 years. And then James said, well, let's move to Payson. So they packed up, bought the Payson Chronicle, and moved to Payson. And Frank and Harold ran the paper with him in Payson. Then Uncle Harold decided to go to work for the Salt Lake Tribune. And so
Doing what?
He was a linotype operator.
Okay.
And so Grandpa Frank, he said, well, I'd like to investigate this newspaper in Heber City. So he went and bought the Wasatch Wave. And
From who?
From the Buys family.
Okay.
Which is quite a funny thing because when we sold the paper, we sold it back to the Buys family, to the son that was the son of the man who owned it when my grandpa bought the Wave. So it stayed in their family too.
So tell us about your father, Jim Mountford, and Uncle Asa Mountford, and their operation of the Washington County News. How did that come about, the Washington County News and the Wasatch Wave? Were they being operated at the same time at one point, or
well,
how did that come
later
about?
on, but at the start, Grandpa he brought Dad and Asa into the Wave up there and then
Asa was your uncle.
Asa is my uncle, and so all three of them operated the newspaper there for a while. But then in about 1958, the County News came up for sale. And Grandpa Frank said, okay, let's do this. I will go down to St. George and run this paper down there. Jim, you stay here and run the Wasatch Wave. So my dad stayed there. But Uncle Asa said, well, I'd like to go to St. George too. And so Grandpa says, okay. So Dad was running the Wave, and Asa and Frank were running the Washington County News back in the 50s.
And did they buy it from Clyde and Nora Lyman,
yes,
right?
Yes, they bought it from Clyde and Nora, yes.
Okay. So tell us about the St. George operation, the Washington County News.
Okay. All right. Well, in 1972, that's when my grandfather his health started to decline a little, and Dad got thinking about it, and he thought, well, St. George is probably going to have much better growth opportunity than Heber City at the time. And so he talked, and my grandma said, come on down, Jimmy, we need you down here to run the paper and help out Asa, because Asa was having a little bit of a struggle running it on his own. And so Dad and Mom decided to pack up from Heber and move down here in 1972. plus the fact I had some arthritis problems with my knees, and they felt that the warmer weather down here would be much better for me to be able to function a little better. So 72 we moved down here, and at the time the County News was your standard letterpress operation. They still used linotypes with the hot lead to produce the newspaper and that. And Dad got thinking about it. He knew that offset was on the horizon out there, and he mentioned to Grandpa, he said, "Dad, we need to upgrade this paper up to offset to be able to compete." And my grandfather was kind of funny about it because he thought since he was a linotype operator himself and he had learned all letterpress, he said, no, letterpress will be around forever and all that. And it's funny because I was reading an article once that they said that letterpress was around for 200 years, but offset only lasted 50 before digital kicked it off the scene.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Tell us about the equipment that was used for publishing the weekly Washington County News, and how and where and at what cost, and if you remember, were these printing presses acquired, and how were they used at the County News?
Okay, now this is from, I was 9 years old when we moved here, but I grew up in the Wave also. I mean, I was in a bassinet on the front counter in the Wave. I mean, me and my 2 brothers and my sister, I mean, all of us were, babysat in the newspaper office, basically.
And your 2 brothers and your sister what were their names?
Okay, Peggy is my sister. She's the oldest of the siblings. My brother Jeffrey is next, but he's passed away. And then my brother Kevin, that's the 3rd in our family. And then there's me.
Wow.
So
okay.
there was the four of us there were raised in the print shop.
So tell us about the equipment and what was, for publishing, and how did you acquire that? What was the cost of it?
Okay.
How was it used at the County News?
Well, when we came down, that since they were still doing the letterpress, they had the 2 linotype machines that are there in the shop, which are basically they're hot lead casting machines that make a line of type in lead. So that's why they were called linotype. And we would set that all up on those, and then they would lay all that lead out on a stone, what they called the stone, and then there was a form that they would lock it into the form. And then we had a big letterpress web press inside the building there downtown, if you can believe that. And they would.
And the address was?
23 East St. George Boulevard.
Okay.
Yeah. And they would take it over and slide those forms into that big flatbed press, and it was called a Goss Coxotype, and it was a web press that the press, comparing to the press that we had up at the Wave, it was a sheet-fed press, as they call it, but they had to feed it by sheet in there, where this press, it would go through a folder that was hooked to the press itself and would come out all ready to go, be mailed and all that down here. And so that was what and the mailing, basically we had 2 guys that caught those papers as they come out of the press, and they had a instrument called a wing mailer that had the subscription list on a roll in it with an adhesive, and then they would take the paper, hold it there, and then they would just smack it with that, and then toss it, and then grab the next one, and they just sit over there, bam, 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 bam.
And it stamped the
address. They were addressing all those papers.
Okay.
Just by using that little mailer.
And then they took it up to the post office.
Yeah, they would bag it up and then take it up to the post office.
What else? What other equipment? I know that you have so much equipment in there.
Yeah.
So let's hear about each of those pieces of equipment and how and when you acquired them and what they were used for.
Okay. All right. Up in the front area is where we had the job printing machinery. We had a Heidelberg windmill press, which was a letter press that it was an automatic feeding, because previously everything used to be hand fed, that you would have to stand there with the paper, and as the platen come down, you would have to slide the paper into a set of guides that would hold the sheet, and then it would fold it up in push it against the form, and then you had to grab it and take it out and put it on your finished pile. Where this press, you loaded the paper in a stack, started up, it had a set of suckers that would feed it into a traveling gripper that spun around. It would hold it, platen would go up, push it against, down, put it over there, and while it was delivering over here, it was picking up the next sheet to go in automatically.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
When did you go to offset printing?
We went
That come later?
Offset came in, well, that's Grandpa, had the foresight that they did actually buy that big offset that we had in the back. They bought that in 1968. And amazingly, they only paid, I believe it was $18,000 for it, but in 1968 dollars, that was a lot of money.
And that's kind of what I remember.
Yeah, yeah.
When I came into your office.
Yeah.
Was the offset printing.
But that was just, and actually the only reason they bought that press is because of Wenzel Tent out there in the industrial park. They needed somebody that had a really big press that could print these labels for the tents and the sleeping bags and stuff that they made out there in the factory. And so that's one reason they bought this press. But then Dad, we did letterpress for, let's see, I think it was about, 1975. And Dad kind of said, you know, everybody else in the state is upgrading to offset. And so he investigated in it, and that's when we bought the 3-unit Fairchild News King that was out in the building on Dixie Downs.
You had a separate building?
Yeah, we had that separate building out there.
Where was the address?
It was on 1100 West and about 1099 North out there on the Actually, when we built it, there was absolutely nothing out there.
Was that in St. George Industrial Park? Or no?
No, it was basically, it was out, the Entz brothers they was starting an industrial park out there by their feed mill.
Oh, by their feed mill?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So you had 2 separate facilities.
2 separate
then.
buildings, yes.
Okay. Any other equipment that you wanted to describe or talk about?
Yeah, there's plenty to talk about in there. Because, well, we had these 2 big lead casting machines. That was the one thing with the letterpress, is that anytime we had to do a ad for anything, we would get this little, it was kind of a papery mat that they would put in this lead casting machine, and it would make a mold of the ad on there, and then they would cast that, they would attach it to a piece of wood, and then they could put it in the press and print, and the pictures came in as engravings. Everything was on a metal engraving back, and that's why you didn't get a lot of pictures in the older newspapers, because it was quite a process to do a picture for the newspaper.
And we're talking just black and white pictures
at
that time,
just black and white, yeah.
So tell us a little bit about the transformation to color, too.
Well,
that must have been a process as well.
It was, because the first thing they did is they came out with this machine called a scanograver. And instead, we still weren't using film for pictures. What it was is we would take a photograph that somebody brought in, you would mount it on a drum on one side of the machine, and then there was a piece of plastic that wrapped around that drum on the other side, and then there was a hot engraving head on that. And then the machine would spin, and there was a scanner head that would scan the photos as it spun around on the machine. And on the other side, that engraving head was over there going bzz, 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 basically making a halftone on that plastic on there.
Okay, and so when you got your paper, when the weekly paper came out, the Washington County News, you put them in some kind of binders, didn't you? I mean,
yes.
so that they were in year binders that were available at the front counter. Is that right?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Every week they would send a copy of the paper to a company called Newsfile, and they would gather them all up, and at the end of the year they would bind them up into a big old binder and then we kept them in the front cupboard, and if you wanted to come in and look something up from the past, you could do that.
Okay.
And at the same time, we were sending copies up to the University of Utah, was doing it. I believe the Utah Tech has it in their special collections. We sent.
It was Dixie College at the time,
yes.
later to become Dixie State
yes.
College, etc. There was something else I was going to ask you about with with the at the newspaper there, you had staff writers come in, right?
Yeah.
Like Dorothy C?
Yeah, Dorothy C. was one of
Okay.
our staff
Who were-
writers.
What did they do, and did they have any offices in there? in the building?
Basically, Dorothy kind of operated out of her home, and she would just, she would do things like she would cover the city council and any other the county stuff or things like that and then she would compile it at her home, and then every Tuesday morning she'd come in the door and give us everything she'd wrote, and then she'd hand it to the typesetters, and then they'd take off and start setting the type to put it in the paper. And
You had Bill Heaton, too.
Bill Heaton was there, and we also had Bill Cooper. He used to work for the Spectrum, and then he came to work for us as a photographer and writer also.
Okay. And I want to talk a little bit more about the more modern part of the Washington County News a little bit later. Were there any other staff writers that wrote for the Washington County News, and what was their particular level of expertise? Anyone besides those three?
Mainly back in those days, we relied an awful lot on local people. That we had correspondents in each town.
How many correspondents did you have?
Oh, we had a lot, because we had correspondents. We had people in Springdale, Hurricane, Laverton, Tokerville, Enterprise. We had one out in Mount Trumbull.
Mount Trumbull was
Mrs. Bundy.
Mrs. Bundy wrote the Mount Trumbull.
Yep.
And hers was very well read. They were all very well read, right?
Yes. Oh yeah, Gerd Ants in Santa Clara. I mean, and let's see, Emma Fife did the Ivans News, and let's see, Georgina Hunt did Washington, and Sylvia Gifford was in Springdale, and May Hall did Enterprise.
Enterprise.
Yeah.
Okay. Did we cover all of the towns?
That's pretty much. I think that's because the correspondents they would write as they felt, as long as they wanted to do it. Basically, Dad did pay them to do that.
Okay.
And
so let's talk about your involvement with the Washington County News. And we kind of left you where you were at. You'd finished Dixie College, and then you went on to where was it?
Went up to the University of Utah for 2 years.
In what?
In mechanical engineering.
And then what happened after that?
After
coming
that,
to the County News.
Well, basically, I was up there going to school, and Dad sat me down and he says, "I would like you to come and work in the business here," because basically I was having a little trouble getting funds to keep going to school at that time. And I thought, well, if I go back and work for Dad for a couple of years, maybe I can get the money and then I can continue on with my education later. Mm-hmm. So I decided to go into the business. Well, because I had been I had been running printing presses since I was 12. So.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay, so what year did you come to the Washington County News?
Okay, let's see. Well, I would say, I started working in there when I was, at 12.
At 12?
Yeah, because
But when you came in, of course you were helping out.
Yeah, I was helping out because I was kind of learning things, because I would help like with the mailing of the newspaper, and also we used to deliver copies to all the businesses in town, so I would take that and basically do a paper route.
You were like an apprentice.
Yeah, an apprentice,
okay.
Yes. And then when I came back from college, I got into doing an awful lot of the heavy-duty press running. I was running the big presses, and I started running the newspaper press also.
And what year was this?
That was about 1986, I believe.
1986, okay. So why did the Washington County News end publication?
Okay, basically what happened with the county was, because it was when we sold it off to John Rogers, who was formerly the editor and publisher of the Spectrum, and they had a conglomerate come in and buy up the Spectrum, and
which was Thompson Newspapers.
And they terminated John. And so he thought, well, I'd like to stay in the newspaper business, and so he come in and had a discussion with my dad and Asa, and they decided to sell the paper to him.
And this was about 1986?
This was about 1986. And so John took over the paper, and he ran it till about 1988. But what kind of happened over those 2 years is that the market forces in the town kind of changed, that Thompson decided we don't want any competition in St. George anymore. So John would go try to sell advertising to the local businesses, and they'd say, well, Thompson's offering this super low price on their ad rate, and John says, well, I can't match that. And so it got down to a point where he just couldn't afford to keep it in business anymore.
But at one point, John went to twice or three times a week, didn't he, to compete with the Spectrum?
Yes, he was trying to do that, and it just got to the point where the costs were just too much for...
And the Spectrum was offering not just the daily newspaper, but they had all these other side publications too, right?
Yes.
That all really contributed to really hurting the Washington County News.
Yeah, that was kind of their goal, was to put the Washington County News out of business at that time.
Which was really sad. So
yes.
This happened in March of 1988, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it did.
What happened after that, as far as the Mountford family involvement with that location, that all of that equipment?
Okay.
When did Classic Printing get started?
Classic Printing basically started when
the County News shut down.
When they sold the County News to John Rogers, because Dad said, well, we're only selling the newspaper. We still have our job printing operation here. And basically that was the bread and butter of most weekly newspapers through the years, is that to supplement their income, they had the job printing shop where they would go down and do all kinds of extra printing around town for that. And
so Classic Printing started in 1986?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, right when we sold the County News.
When you sold the County News, and your family said, we're just selling off the paper, we're going to stay in the business of printing.
Yeah.
So who was involved with Classic Printing?
Okay, Classic Printing was my father and my uncle Asa, and my mother was the bookkeeper.
What's your mother's name?
Doris.
Okay. So it was Jim.
And Jim and Doris and
Doris
Asa.
and Asa and you, right?
And me. And at that time, we did have a few other, we had one employee that was Stuart Giles, and he actually worked for my dad at the Wave in Heber. And he moved down here because he thought, again, that the economic opportunities for growth in St. George were much better. So he asked Dad if he could move his family down here, and Dad says, okay.
Okay.
So
what type of jobs did Classic Printing undertake?
Basically, we were still printing the newspapers.
You're still?
Because we still owned the newspaper press. We just sold the newspaper itself.
So you're printing the Washington County News.
So we were doing
plus...
Okay, I better get my paper here.
He's got quite a list here.
This is a major list here.
And we want to hear every one of them.
Okay, the newspapers that we printed were the Washington County News, the Bloomington Desert Beacon.
Which was published by, editor was Ron Ahrens.
Yeah.
Go on.
Yep. And then the Iron County Record. And
in Cedar City.
Yeah, that was in Cedar City. The Southern Utah News in Kanab. The Lake Powell Chronicle in Page,
Arizona.
The Beaver County News that was in Milford.
Milford?
Yeah, in Milford. There was the Beaver County News was in Milford. The Beaver Press was in Beaver.
Okay.
So they had two papers in Beaver County. Okay, then we did the Desert Echo in Mesquite and the Moapa Valley Progress in Overton. And then back here in St. George, the Red Desert Digest, the Senior Sampler. Then this was an oddball one. It was called This Ain't News.
This ain't news.
It was a project that was done by a couple of Dixie College professors, and it was kind of a satire of anything that happened
I've
around
never
St.
heard of
George.
that one. How about, didn't you publish or print at one point the Big Water Times?
Yes, the Big Water Times.
Which, by the way, was run by Alex Joseph and his polygamous wives.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
and
that
they
was,
came in.
Yes,
That's
they came
really
in.
interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. Oh, and then now we'll move on to the school newspapers.
Okay.
The Dixie Sun.
The Dixie Sun, which was the Dixie College newspaper.
The Dixie College newspaper. The SUU Thunderbird.
Southern Utah University.
Uh-huh. And then we had Canyon View High School's Canyon View Chronicle.
Out of Cedar City.
Out of Cedar City. The Cedar Post, which was Cedar High. The Dixie Flyer Flash.
St. George.
The Pine View Predator. The Snow Canyon Warrior. And then we had the Parowan Ram that was out of Parowan High.
Isn't that incredible? I mean, it's just amazing
Yeah.
that you contributed to so many publications in southern Utah and southeastern Nevada. You know, just that's quite the
Were you printing your competitors' newspapers while you still owned the Washington County News?
Basically, yes, we were.
Okay, so you had the contracts,
Yeah.
separate contracts with each
Yeah.
newspaper. Okay.
So, so what other services did Classic Printing offer to the local community? Did you do business cards?
We did business cards, envelopes, business forms. That's what our smaller presses did. That was in the downtown location. That the one press that I was telling you earlier about that we brought in for Wenzel, we used that press. That if anybody needed big posters, because nobody else in the area had a press that could print an 18 by 24 inch poster, where we had this press that could print one that big. So any large poster, like for the Lions Dixie Roundup or anything like that, was done on that printing press.
And this is something I should have asked you earlier. Do you have a logo of of Classic Printing? Did you ever come up with a logo, your own logo, right?
Yes, we did.
Okay, maybe we can look at that afterwards and add that to the transcript, because I think it'd be kind of neat to see what your Classic Printing logo looked like. So,
well, to kind of give you a idea what it was paper running through printing rollers.
oh, cool. Wow. That's really awesome. Okay.
Did you print maps?
We used to print some maps for Zion Park. In fact, that was another thing we did on the newspaper press, is that Zion Park over there in the lodge, they used a newspaper style menu for the restaurants. And so every summer we would do, because we had a contract with the company that preceded Xanterra. It was TW Services.
TW Services, yeah.
So we printed all the menus for Zion Park, Bryce Canyon, Grand Canyon. Also.
Grand Canyon North Rim?
Yeah.
Wow.
Everything that
amazing.
TW had.
Love to see those.
Yeah. Okay. Why did Classic Printing cease business operation, and what year was that?
Okay. Classic Printing was going along great until 2017. That's when my health took a major crash on me. Because September of 2017, I was at home and I had just said goodnight to my mom, and she said an hour later, I shouted her name out, and she went in there, and I was laying flat on my face on the floor in the bedroom. And I had a grand mal seizure.
Oh.
And so they got me over to the hospital, and they did an MRI, and I had a tumor the size of a tennis ball in my head. That it had finally gotten so big that it pressed down on my frontal lobe and caused me to have the seizure. And so at the time, it was just me and my mom running the business.
When did Jim and Asa retire?
Okay. Dad basically retired when he passed away in 2010.
Okay.
And Asa, he had retired about 5 years earlier than it was about 2005.
Okay.
Yeah, he decided that he was tired of working hard at running that printing press all the time, so he was having troubles with his back, so he decided to pull out. So it was basically just me and Mom in there working away at it.
And your access was from the rear of the building too,
in the
wasn't
rear
it?
of the
You had to
building.
park in the back.
Yeah, to park out back
then
and come
walk
down the old
down the
walkway.
ramp.
Yep. There was the ramp that went into, if you went right, you went into the print shop. You went left, you used to go into Snow's grocery store that was there originally.
Right, okay.
But anyway, after surgery, the rehab and that, and Mom just said, well, she says, I don't, because the doctors told me that they didn't want me anywhere near anything, any big, large equipment there until after I'd been through some extensive physical therapy, because actually, after surgery, I had to learn how to walk, talk, and write and do everything again, because it was just like having a traumatic brain injury.
Oh.
So Mom just said, well, let's close it at the end of 2017. So that's when we decided to shut it down in 2017. And fortunately, it's like I was discussing with my siblings about it, and they said, well, you know, the way the market conditions are getting, and that was the other thing too, is technology was changing so fast in the printing industry. And I mean, and we were still trying to hang on to offset printing. And that, at the time, I was having a hard time finding litho film, because we used to do, because that's how we would put, your copy, we would put it in a big camera, make a negative of it, and then we'd take that negative, strip it up in what we called a mask, and then put it on an aluminum plate and burn the image into the aluminum plate that went on the press. And it was getting down, so we couldn't find film anymore because everybody had gone to the digital stuff there, and then the plate companies started going out of business also. So offset was just dying slowly, because I know the last time I got a box of film, they had to source it out of, I believe, they sourced it out of Mexico, because there was because Kodak went bankrupt at that time.
Right
around
it's
there.
a terrible,
Yeah.
terrible thing when Kodak went out of business. So did you sell the location, the business, the equipment, what did you sell?
Okay, so when we closed the business, we had been approached by Randall Richards, who owns the two restaurants over in Ancestor Square, George's Corner and
Painted Pony.
The Painted Pony. And he'd approached us, so probably back in about 2014, that he had this idea, because he had been on a trip to San Francisco, and there was a restaurant in San Francisco that had been put in a converted newspaper office. And so he kept saying, come on, sell me this, I'd like to do this. So in 2017, when we decided to close it, he came and he said, I will buy everything in this building. He says, you don't have to clean it out, anything. He says, I want everything in there. And so we sold him the entire business. And
What year was that?
That was in 2018, when we sold that to him.
Would you mind disclosing the amount of the sale, or if it's okay if you don't want to say that? But
basically, we sold it. Let's see, I believe it was $70,000 at the time to take that.
And what year was that again?
That was 2018.
2018.
Yeah.
Okay. Before we move on to my next question, Ron has, I think, 3 questions he'd like to ask you about the building itself.
Okay.
Yes, we received an anonymous request from the Washington County Historical Society, basically, to research this. And we understand that the building was originally in the old mining town of Silver Reef.
Yes.
And it was a saloon.
Yes.
Do you know what the name of the saloon was?
Unfortunately, no. That's the whole thing is that my father and I, we did try to tried to do some research on it. We never really could find out which one it was, because we found out that there was like 6 saloons in Silver Reef.
Right.
And I mean, and really the only clue we had, this is quite funny, because everybody used to come in and say, we want to see the wallpaper.
Yeah.
Because we had these cupboards that were along the wall in the front office in there. And if you opened up the cupboard, there was the original saloon wallpaper in the back of the cupboard. And so, that was
Is the bar was the bar still there?
No, that front cover, that front counter was probably built by Clyde and Nora Lyman.
Oh, okay.
Because we got looking at it. It was too recent.
It looked more recent.
Yeah, it's more.
Right,
It was
okay.
more recent cabinetry type stuff.
So the only original part of that building was the building itself. Nobody really seems to know how it was transported down or anything like that.
Basically, we kind of figured that what they did is they probably detached the front of the building, laid it down on a wagon, and then probably took, because a lot of people think it was that big long building that's in there, but
Right.
actually it's where the wood floor ended, right? Because you remember when you go in there that we had cement up to a certain point until you got up into the front part of the building, and then there was the old wood floor.
So how many
was up
feet would
there.
that be?
I think it was about 30 feet.
30 feet.
Yeah.
Okay.
To
Ron,
the-
any other questions about the building? And
Was the facade on the building changed at any point?
No, that was one. We had a discussion with the city one time, because I can't remember what year it was, but we had a car go through the front of the building.
a car went through the front
Yeah,
of the building?
There was a van come off of Main Street and lost control on the slick road and hit the corner of our building that's there by the front door, took that corner out, and then took out that whole shop that was in the snow building next door at one point.
Wow.
So we had,
Did you put up Washington County News, that facade up at the top?
yeah,
You had that done?
yeah.
Did you do it yourself, or did you have it done by someone else?
I think Lyman's did the original sign, because there was there used to be a really big sign that was on the front of the building that we repainted it to say Classic Printing on it. But there was a big sign that said Washington County, and then my grandfather, he decided he wanted it easier to see from the sidewalk, so he had a sign maker come in and paint Washington County News on the front window.
Okay. And who put up the historical marker there?
That was
In the front.
Montrue Larkin was instrumental in getting that put on there, because
Okay.
she decided that we had a lot of historic buildings in St. George, and so she kind of spearheaded that push to get that marker put on that building. I think there's one down on the Hardy House and the old courthouse, and on a lot of the historic buildings. It was all Montrue that kind of got that done.
Do you have any idea what year?
Yeah. so that
What
was my-
year the saloon was brought down?
Not particularly.
That's right.
And the other, this is another story that it's actually in the county news about what happened to that building at one point also. That one side of the building had a rough time because there used to be a 2-story hotel next door where the Snow's Market is now. In fact, I think there's a historical picture of the hotel. But at one point, that hotel caught on fire, and it took so much water to put the fire out that the wall of the building of the print shop was adobe, and it melted the adobe. The roof actually fell down on the building.
Oh.
Now, this is what we always laughed, a typical newspaper man. They jacked the roof back up and put the newspaper out the next day.
Wow.
That sounds
yeah.
just like the newspaper.
Yeah.
Wow. Any other questions, Ron?
No, that's
Okay.
good.
Brady, we have Brady Frank here in the studio with us as well. Did you have any other questions, Brady,
Yeah, I
for
do.
Kelly?
You can hear me well, I'm sure. See here. Do you know what the earliest print order that's physically in that building is?
Well, if you counted the newspaper files that was in the building, there was actual copy from 1908 that was in there in one of the files.
How many artifacts are currently in the building that you can think of? Estimate.
Rough estimate, probably pretty much everything in there is an artifact. I mean, because we always said that the building was like a museum, because when you start at the front, and then as you go further back in the building, everything gets newer in there.
So approximately how many pieces of equipment do you think are still in the building?
Pretty much everything is, I mean, he has done nothing with it basically since we
Numbers
left.
wise.
But number wise, let's see, there would be 4 offset presses, 1 letter press, there's 2 linotypes, and now here's a bit of trivia. There is 1 press that's buried in the floor.
Buried in the floor?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
We had it was the letter press, the web letter press. See, at the time when they put that in, the doors were right there on the back of the building. But then they built that extension on there later on where we couldn't get anything out because we had that elevator in the back that went up to the loading dock that was up on the next level. So when we decided to take that press out, and it had to put the forms in it, there was a pit underneath the press that you could stand in and then reach up and put the forms into it. And so the press disassembling guys, they looked at it and they said, well, we can't get this. It was these big, heavy flatbeds that the forms went on. And there was no way that our elevator could hoist that out of the building. So what they did is they just cut the frames off and let those fall down in there. And then we cemented over the top of the pit. So there's a half of a printing press in the floor of that building.
Okay, any other pieces of equipment that you can
well, let's see.
itemize?
Let's see, there's 2 large process cameras in there, 2 film processors, and the typesetting equipment, same thing. We have photo typesetting equipment from the very first ones that came out clear up to the desktop publishing machine. So let's see, there's 2 very vintage photo typesetters and 2 medium vintage photo typesetters, and then there's a headline setting machine, and let's see, oh yeah, and then the desktop publishing machinery.
Okay. What happened to all the bound volumes of the Washington County News?
Okay.
And any other publications that might have been in there?
The bound volumes, at one point, Doug Alder approached us because he wanted to help the college complete their collection of the files that they were missing. So
Was this while he was president of the college?
This is while he was president of the college.
Okay.
And so he would come in and take them, and they would scan them, and then he would bring them back to us. And at one point, he asked Dad if we would consider donating them to the college at one point. And Dad had been approached by the University of Utah also because they wanted to scan them all for their Utah newspapers project. Mm-hmm. And so we kind of hung on, and Dad passed on before we really got anything done with that. And basically who has them now is that Randall Richards has them now.
Randall Richards has
Yes.
them. Do you know what he's done with them?
Him and his father-in-law is Brooks Pace.
Brooks Pace.
I think that they built a room up I think it's in Brooks's house that they built a room to store them in because he couldn't stand it because they were in the front cupboards up there in the shop, and he just said, I think they're getting ruined and all that. And I says, well, yeah, it's probably not really good for them to be here in the building like that.
So is the digitizing completed or not?
I think they've digitized them up to 1945, I believe.
At Utah Tech?
No, up at the University of Utah.
Up at the University of Utah.
Yeah. Because I think what happened with that is that their grant money ran out, and so they had to put that on pause for a while.
Okay, so do you know how far it's gone at Utah Tech? Special collections?
I don't really know. I know that...
what about microfilm?
Microfilm, I believe it's
present, it's current, right?
Yeah.
All the way up to
I believe it's current.
88,
yeah.
right? Okay.
Yeah.
When was the first edition of the Washington County News?
Let's see.
It goes back to...
Yeah, I was going to say
It goes back to, well,
Yeah.
it started like around 1901, and then
Yeah.
it stopped. And then it started again on January 30th, 1908.
Yeah, because the original paper
'cause the
here
original was
called
John
the
R.
St. George,
Wallace.
It was called the St. George Union. And
Yeah.
John Wallace, he started
John,
that one.
yes.
And then he decided, I don't want to.
Right.
And so basically, my sister told me, because she kind of researched this, she said that he went up to Idaho and started another paper up in Idaho, and then he came back to St. George and started the County News up again.
Right, in 1908.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in 1901, was the newspaper being printed from that building?
Yeah.
So that would mean that the building had to have been moved from Silver Reef
Yeah.
Prior to that.
prior to
to
that
that.
date.
Prior to
That's
that
probably
date.
as
Yeah.
close as we're going to get.
I think
Yeah.
that's as close as
That's
you're
pretty
gonna
good,
get.
though. I
Yeah.
didn't know that coming in. I was
Yeah.
thinking actually a little bit later.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank
Brady, did you have any other questions?
Anything of historical note in the warehouse?
And the warehouse.
Is that warehouse still? Do you still own that warehouse?
No, we don't. I was going to say the only thing that's historic in there now is antique cars, because
Okay.
the guy that is in there now is rebuilding old cars in there.
Okay.
But in the other building, there's few historical things in there still.
How many additions are on that building?
Oh, there are a lot.
It's
A lot of additions to
I
the
counted
to the
3 at
Washington
least.
County News building?
Yeah, like 3.
Yeah.
3
Yeah.
additions?
Yeah,
Oh
that
Yeah.
my
goes
gosh.
way
Yeah,
back.
because because you got the original Silver Reef part.
Okay.
Where the wood
Somewhere
floor,
prior to
and then-
1901.
That's
and
the
then-
front.
And then
That's the
somebody
front.
put an addition that was back to about where the paper, remember where the paper cutter was in the building? Mm-hmm. It was about right to there where that first wall, where that doorway is that goes into the next section.
Mm-hmm.
That was the first edition on there, because they built that on there when they brought in the linotypes and the newspaper press. The first newspaper press was up there in that part of the building too. Okay, then the next addition to it was what we call the Adobe section, and that was where the second web press was, and the big offset press that's sitting there back in the back corner of that, and then the 2 lead casters are in the corner of that building. So that was the second edition. And then what you probably know is the yellow part, because remember it was painted bright yellow back there.
Right.
That was Dad trying to make it happy in there at one time. But okay, the yellow part was built in about 1969.
So that
on
was
there.
the third,
That
about
was
the third?
the third edition on there
Oh my
too.
gosh.
And it was in a hillside, so
Yeah.
the loading dock was,
Yeah,
on
that's
the
why the
second
loading
floor
dock was on
compared to
because that's why you had to go down the ramp. Because originally, before they built that, the back door was down there. There was just the flat back of the building, and that was all open. There's that cement ramp. There was no walls around it. You just walked down the ramp and went into the grocery store.
And that ramp is still there, I believe.
Yes.
So they used that ramp for what?
It was so they could roll the grocery carts in and out of the grocery store up the parking lot.
But I mean, and did you have a loading ramp?
Oh yeah, we had the loading dock was next to that.
Loading
ramp.
dock, okay.
Yeah.
And the loading dock was used for bringing in supplies and
Yeah.
anything.
Well, we used to bring the rolls for that web offset were like double wide newspaper width. So the roll was roughly about 8 feet wide. And so
This is
it would
incredible.
fit right through
Okay.
that door. And the elevator that was behind it was built to fit that roll exactly, because we just roll it out of the truck, put it on that elevator downstairs, and then when they had a dolly that they would roll it on there and just roll it up into the press up there in the front. But all the other paper came in there. We'd stack it on that elevator, run it downstairs, use a hand truck to move it over by the printing machines that we were using it. And so that's how we got, and then when we were done, everything would go back on that elevator up and out into the delivery truck.
Okay. Your delivery truck, what kind of a truck was it and how long? I mean, what did...
Basically, it was whatever pickup truck that either Dad or Uncle Asa had at the time, because I
Okay.
know it started out with a 67 Chevy pickup was the first one, and then it was roughly about a mid-70s GMC. And then it moved up to about a 1981 GMC. And then when I got in there, it was a 83 GMC pickup
Okay.
my dad had. So we just used to deliver out of the pickup trucks that everybody had.
I mean, how did you deliver? Did you actually go to the mailboxes or to the doors, or?
On the newspaper, most of everything was all delivered by the post office.
Okay.
On that, because we had a machine call out there in our other building with the newspaper press out there. We had a machine called an addressograph.
Yeah, we talked about that.
And so we would put the addresses on them and bag
That
them
was,
all up.
and that was modern. That was more
Yeah,
modern.
that was the more
that was a
modern.
more
It
modern.
had
Right.
a little stencil that we would
Right.
type out a stencil in it, and then it would feed that stack of stencils, and you would just sit there and take the newspaper and stick it in, stamp, stick it in, stamp, and just keep sitting there doing that. And then somebody would come and pick up all the addressed ones, and then they would bundle it and put it in, stick a sticker on it for the post office if it was going to SCF 840 or going to Las Vegas or whatever. We would just do it all like that. So the newspaper's all done like, but the job printing, we had to physically deliver it to everybody.
Yeah.
Because that's what that's what I ended up doing at first, was that I would be the one that would have to load up the pickup truck and then take envelopes over to some of the real estate offices, or deliver somebody's business cards or their business forms or whatever.
And some of the computer programs you used were like Photoshop, and what was the other, the text, what was that called?
Okay.
The one for a while, and then it just kind of lost its excitement.
Quark Express.
Quark Express.
Oh, wow.
Oh my gosh, I forgot about Quark
name ahead of
Express.
its
So
time.
tell us
Yeah.
about Quark Express.
It's really funny how in the desktop, when we bought our first Macintosh, everybody in town hated us because we had the very first Power Mac that Apple had built, because everybody else was still using Mac 2s and Quadra 800s, and we got the first Power Mac.
And that was impressive.
It was so much faster, because I mean, I had two typesetters over in Kinko's that just literally hated me because I had this, and we bought a big scanner to go with it, but then the programs we got were Quark Express, Photoshop, Illustrator, and so that was the thing is that at the time, I don't think that InDesign and that had even been conceived at that point. So Quark Express is what everybody was using at the time.
Right.
And it was basically it was an extremely powerful page layout program at the time.
It was. And then, but you know, I had a major failure with it. I was keeping journals, a journal on there, and it just up and disappeared, and I was never able to get it back. So there were once in a while, there were some quirks with Quark Express.
Yeah.
Okay. Brady, you had one more question?
Yeah, one more question and a comment for clarification. So first, for the comment for clarification, coming directly from Randall Richards, exempting 4 years, the entirety of the run for the Washington County News is actually sitting at here at Utah Tech in Special Collections. I believe they have scanned it up till 1958 at Utah Tech, but I could be wrong on that at least. And the question is if you could tell me a little bit about the federal printing you did, because originally when the BLM came down here, when Zion and Dixie National Forest opened up, they did not have their own printing presses. So it would be interesting to kind of hear a little bit about those federal documents.
Okay. Yes, we did an awful lot of work for the government at
You
that
did?
time. Yes, we
Okay.
did.
Such as?
Well, we did an awful lot of, like, say, they needed letterheads and envelopes and whatnot, and we used to print some of the materials that they handed, like what they hand out, like in the recreation division down there, brochures about the area, maps and things like that. We used to do an awful lot of stuff for the Arizona Strip office.
Arizona Strip BLM office. Did you do any work for the Forest Service?
Yeah, we did some work for the Forest Service.
A little bit of work.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we did actually, like I said, we did a lot of work for the courts and all kinds of things. I mean, basically
Fifth District Court?
the Fifth District Court and the Justice Court.
The Justice Court.
And all that. So yeah,
Did you do anything for Ninth Circuit Court while it lasted?
I think, yeah, we did do some work for them also.
Okay.
Anything for the Atomic Energy Commission?
You know what's funny about it is I could say we did something for the Atomic Energy Commission, but it wasn't for the Atomic Energy Commission. It was for a movie that was filmed here. I mean, anytime that, in fact, there's a movie that they filmed here that was called Harry's War, that we printed all the signage that you see when the government foreclosed his home and all that in there. And plus, there's also a little picture frame that's full of election buttons that was actually out of our front office that was in his antique store.
Huh. So did you do anything else for any movies that were made here?
Yeah. I can't remember. There was another movie that we did we printed a whole bunch of posters and bumper stickers that said "Save Mono Lake" on them.
Huh.
And I thought,
Mono
Mono
Lake.
Lake is in California.
That's in California.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
apparently they were pretending something was Mono Lake around here when they
gosh.
did that
Okay.
one.
Wow.
But yeah, we did. In fact, let's see, yeah, there was 2 or 3 movies that we did some printing for them around here.
So what kind of legacy do you think the Washington County News and its later successor, Classic Printing, has had on the local community?
Well, I think it had a substantial effect on the community, the County News did, at least, because it was something that was, it basically gave people the information about, things that were going around town, and they liked reading, and I know that was the thing about the correspondence. People liked reading about hey, so-and-so's son came to visit him this weekend and things like that. And plus, I think it helped the city grow by providing the advertising in that for the businesses to subsist in the town and all that. And I think Classic Printing did the same thing because we offered an awful lot of printing services and things. And like I said, where we had the neatest computer in town there for a while.
Yeah.
And actually, I think we did have the first fax machine for the public in there too.
And didn't you belong to the Utah, what was the?
Yeah, we was in the Utah Press Association.
Press Association. And
Yeah.
did you win any awards?
My grandfather won a Master Editor Award, and I believe my father did too in that.
Okay.
Because I know my grandfather's portrait's up in the state capitol.
In the newspaper Hall of Fame?
In the newspaper Hall of Fame.
Okay.
That Frank's picture is
Okay.
up there in the newspaper Hall of Fame.
So when you look back, why did you choose this career?
Well, mainly because I actually enjoyed working. I mean, because that was one reason when I went to college, because I liked working on mechanical things. And that's why I was thinking mechanical engineer at the one time. But then running a printing press is quite an art to learn how the nuances of how to operate a printing machine and be able to produce the printed product. And I actually loved doing that, because that's one reason why I asked Dad if I could start learning how to run a printing press when I was 12, 13 years old, because it was just fascinating to watch that blank sheet go in and then come out of the machine with the printed product and be happy that it looked good and that you were doing a good job for somebody.
Right. When you had that tumor, was that essentially the end of your career, or have you done anything since then? Have you
Pretty much that kind of ended my printing career. And then after that, my mom's health started to decline, and so I decided that since I'm the only one of the family that stayed here, I thought, well, I should become her caregiver. So I did take care of her for about 3 years before she passed away.
And when did she pass away?
She passed away in 2022.
Okay. Yeah. Describe. Did you you got married, right?
I
never got married.
Never got married. No.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So I can't ask you if you had any children or grandchildren.
No.
Okay. So what other civic, community, or religious organizations did you participate in, if any?
Mainly mainly I was in the Boy Scouts quite heavily. I got my eagle and all that. And let's see, I did participate some in the Chamber of Commerce and what else? I don't know, that might have been about it that I can think of.
Did any of
moment.
those experiences stand out from any of those organizations besides work? I know sometimes work was probably it encompassed nearly most of your life.
Yes,
didn't
yes,
it?
yeah, because basically in a newspaper family, your whole life revolves around the deadline of producing the newspaper.
And that's significant.
Yes.
The deadline of producing the newspaper.
Yes, because every Tuesday you knew it was time to compile everything and get it ready to be printed. Then Wednesday morning it went to the press, and then Wednesday afternoon you spent mailing it to have it all out so it was in the mail and delivered by Thursday morning.
And what was your circulation?
Let's see, I believe it was 11,000 at one point.
Which was really good.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
What
good.
year would that have been?
That probably would have been about 1978, I think.
Okay.
So everyone knew about the Washington County News. That's where they got their news.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Okay, so as you look back over your life, what would you like to be remembered for?
Basically, I'd like to be remembered as somebody who had some honesty and integrity, and that I tried to be nice to everybody and do good things with that, and that I helped a lot of businesses get on their feet and get rolling by doing their printing and that, and designing things for them to be able to get their businesses up and running good and that. And so I kind of, that's sort of my legacy there, plus the fact that I have all this knowledge of the industry and the building itself. I mean,
That's
I mean,
significant.
because that's what my sister said to me last night. She says, "Yeah, you practically grew up in that place." And I says, "Well, yeah, I did."
You did.
How many hours a week typically did you work?
As a kid, I was mainly after school, except on deadline day, on
Right.
Tuesday and Wednesday. Tuesday night, sometimes I would get there after school, and then we would work until we basically put the paper to bed.
Yeah.
We would work till 10 o'clock at night.
Wow. As a kid.
And that was a normal thing for a weekly
Yeah.
newspaper.
Yes, it was.
That's what you did.
Yeah.
And as an adult,
And as an adult, I would be in there, I'd probably work about an 8 to 10 hour day, sometimes on regular days, and then other times when there was things that had to be produced and that, I sometimes could spend a 12 to 14 hour day
Wow.
in there
It's
easily.
Incredible. Is there anything else that you feel is important that we haven't asked you that you would like to share with us and share with our audience?
I don't know. I mean, we pretty much covered an awful lot about. I know. Well, it's like going back to my ancestors. I mean, my pioneer ancestors on my dad's side. That the Lyman Curtis was my great grandfather, and he was in the original company with Brigham Young coming into Salt Lake Valley. He was the ninth horseman in the company.
Okay.
And that, and then I know that the Historical Society actually has a page on Patrick Henry McGuire on the website. It talks about him, that he was the recorder over there at the cotton mill and that in Washington City.
Okay.
And so there's a whole.
And that's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
too. So
Yeah.
what a great legacy
Yeah.
that you've left this community.
Fantastic.
I was thinking, Brady, why don't you come over here where we can get you in the picture here towards the end.
Yeah, I can walk.
So,
Hey, I get you there. That's
so that we can at least so everybody can be able to see Brady as well before we close this. We really want to thank Kelly Mountford for taking the time to be with us today. We'd also like to thank Lauren Golden and the staff of the Community Education Channel Studios for allowing us to use their studios and for their technical expertise. This is the Washington County Historical Society's 23rd interview since I began conducting oral history interviews in 2021. Again, we want to thank Ron Carberry to my right for being here, and Kelly and Brady Frank for his technical and background information about the county news and the building as well. So thank you for joining us. Until later.